Saving Syria, defeating Daesh and tackling terrorism around the world. In this special program, we get the declassified views of the former head of the CIA, General David Petraeus. I'm Martin Stanford. This is Insight. Welcome to Insight. He's one of the most famous American military commanders in recent history, inventing a counterinsurgency strategy that now bears his name. He led the troop surge in Iraq and commanded United States forces in Afghanistan before being appointed as the director of the CIA. He is General David Petraeus, and for this special program, he's been speaking to our senior correspondent, Dana Lewis.
General Petraeus, you know, the first time I interviewed you, sir, was in a tent in the Kuwaiti desert on the eve of the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And I think, with a smile, I'll have to ask you, the Middle East was a lot easier to understand at that time. Don't you agree?
There's a lot more complexity. The world has turned over many times since then. We've obviously had the invasion of Iraq. We've had the Arab Spring. We've had new elements emerge in the Islamic extremist ranks that have actually outdone al-Qaeda in certain respects. Certainly the Islamic State in actually capturing ground and declaring a caliphate, building a veritable army, generating revenue, and then proving to be very, very effective on the internet and cyberspace in particular.
Do you think the Iraqi invasion, in retrospect, was the culprit for a lot of what has taken place now in Iraq and Syria? And in retrospect, do you think it was a mistake?
Well, first of all, as the individual who was privileged to serve and to command in Iraq for some 4 years at the 2, 3, and 4-star level, the individual who wrote more letters of condolence to America's mothers and fathers than probably any other American general. That's a question that I am happy to leave to historians and to policymakers. I would point out, though, that there have been many, many other factors that have led to the situation that we see in the Middle East right now. And the toppling of the Saddam regime and the events after that are just one among a number. Obviously, the Arab Spring is what's responsible for toppling the Gaddafi regime, and then indeed, the aftermath of that has obviously been not pretty. It was an Arab Spring that really started what is now a Syrian civil war, now with regional overtones and even global overtones. An Arab Spring-like event in Yemen. And of course, you had, again, developments in Iraq where it seemed as if we had things on a very good trajectory in the aftermath of the surge, during which violence was reduced by some 85% or so and sustained for the subsequent 3.5 years until tragically the Iraqi Prime Minister undid what we'd done together, alienated the Sunni Arab population through a number of actions targeting senior Sunni Arab leaders in the government. Iraqi security services put down the subsequent peaceful demonstrations in a very violent manner. And that, again, tore apart the very fabric of society that we had worked so hard to bring back together during the surge, particularly with the reconciliation component of that surge, the so-called Anbar awakening and the Sahwa.
You would say, don't blame this all on America?
Oh, by no means, no. No, I mean, in fact, I would say that the leaders in that region are the ultimate ones that have to be judged by history, although certainly American actions have been a contributing factor in some respects.
Let's talk about Syria. Becoming more and more violent. Aleppo was under siege. Has it ceased, do you think, to exist as a state now?
I think it'll be very, very difficult to put Syria back together. I think this is Humpty Dumpty. It's fallen, and again, I'm not sure that you can put the parts back together. In fact, I think we probably need to do some very serious and sort of realistic analysis of what is possible in Syria at this point in time. Of course, the diplomacy and so forth is all sought to keep Syria as a unitary state, perhaps some form of federalist state. But it's very hard for me to believe that the Sunni Arabs who have endured so much under Bashar al-Assad, he also put down peaceful demonstrations very, very violently. That's what precipitated this whole eruption of violence in the very beginning, which initially was a Sunni Arab majority versus Shia Alawite minority, the Bashar al-Assad regime civil war. And then, of course, gradually on Bashar's side, you had Lebanese Hezbollah enter the fray. You have the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Quds Force providing advice and assistance, Iran bankrolling Bashar. You now have Shia militia that the Quds Force and others have trained and equipped joining in that fray. And then ultimately, of course, you have Russia entering on their side. And then on the other side, you have various Sunni Arab regional countries and indeed the U.S. in a coalition that's focused in Syria on the Islamic State, but is still in many respects supporting individuals that are seen as a threat to Bashar al-Assad.
So you see the Western strategy then, kill Daesh and al-Qaeda, maneuver around Russia, replace Assad. Do you think that's all unrealistic now, or parts of it hold together?
Well, again, I think, first of all, that you don't want to get rid of Bashar al-Assad until you know what's going to follow him. Now, I am certainly no admirer of Bashar al-Assad. I think that when the President of the United States said he couldn't be part of the future in Syria, there was a lot to that. There's no way that he can be a unifying feature in that country. Indeed, he's actually the magnetic attraction for many of the would-be jihadists and others who have flocked to Syria, initially joining a reasonably moderate Syrian opposition, but one that increasingly was hijacked by Daesh, by the Islamic State, and then also by the al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, now Jabhat Fatah al-Sham.
Which maybe, many people think, while we're all eyes focus on ISIS, on Daesh, that in fact al-Qaeda may emerge much more dangerous and much stronger.
I'm not so sure about that. In fact, we've gone after a number of the leaders of that organization. There's been a fair amount of pressure on them. And indeed, there are actually very loose alliances with many of these groups, with forces that go back and forth, frankly, between the moderate opposition and Nusra, let's say, depending on who has weapons, who has money, who has ammunition for a given fight. It's a very, very complex situation.
So what happens then? What does the future Syria look like? Are there 3 states there?
There could be more than 3. There appears to be what Bashar al-Assad is trying to do is to basically depopulate Aleppo of those that will not support him. This is 250,000 or more citizens in
a very bloody way.
Eastern Aleppo and bombing hospitals, deliberately targeting them in other locations. A little bit of a lull in the action right now, probably so that he can say that he gave them a chance to get out before he goes after whatever is left. And that would be the northern part of a rump Syrian state that would go all the way down to and include Damascus and parts south of it, and then up to Homs and out to the coast and Latakia. Of course, here's where the Tartus naval base is for the Russians. Up here is the Latakia air base that they use.
And then what are the other 2 parts to this, do you think? Or 3 parts, or 4 parts?
Probably some form of Syrian Kurd entity, which probably does not unite with the Iraqi Kurds, I don't believe. And then who knows what kind of Sunni Arab statelets could emerge from this as well. And I think it will be facts on the ground. It will just start to emerge. And at some point in time, I think a realistic appraisal of the future is going to really collide with our aspirations for keeping Syria together. I'd love to see Syria come back together. I'd love to see a popularly chosen, democratically elected leadership of that country. But there are such grievances now. There's been such bloodshed. The estimates are at least 400,000 Syrian citizens have been killed by Bashar's forces at this point in time.
So you think that's unrealistic? Syria holds together somehow?
It appears increasingly unrealistic.
Can you tell me, what do you think is happening with Daesh now? Is a defeat imminent? And what does that defeat look like? Is it simply a question of Raqqa is taken from them and Mosul, which a campaign is about to begin there in Iraq? Is that it? Is that the finishing of them, or?
No, I think there's no question that Daesh will be defeated by the military terms. It will be rendered incapable of accomplishing its mission, if you will, and certainly as an army. I think it's absolutely inevitable that they are going to clear Mosul. Because you have to keep in mind that what Daesh evolved into is something that we've never seen an extremist terrorist group like this do in the past. Al-Qaeda never became a real army in the field with almost combined arms, capabilities, and tactics.
Even if they take Mosul, and you're fairly confident it sounds like they can do that fairly effectively, the problem is the day after, they're going to have a lot of different forces pulling and tugging there and not getting along, and it may unravel quickly.
Well, I don't know about quickly. I don't think it will unravel quickly, but what you could have in the months and years that lie ahead would be the reemergence of grievances that ultimately create fertile fields for the planting of the seeds of extremism and ultimately for the rise of ISIS 3.0, and obviously that would be tragic.
Well, Dana is with me in the studio. I was taken by his caution there, perhaps having learned lessons in Iraq. Do not take Bashar al-Assad out in Syria until you know what your plan is.
It's interesting. I mean, this is the guy who wrote the counter-insurgency manual for the United States. He rewrote it after Iraq. So he says when you look at countries like Libya, when you look at Syria, Afghanistan, Helmand in Afghanistan, for instance, that whole area, ungoverned spaces will be filled with extremists. So he's, as you say, he is not a fan of Assad. Assad has to go at some point. But in this Humpty Dumpty Syria, which cannot be put back together again, which will fragment into 2 or 3 or 4 pieces, he said Assad is still going to be a factor. So don't remove him until we know where we're going. And that's probably not something that they're going to model and negotiate where they're going. Syria will just, the new Syria, in whatever form it looks like, will slowly take shape before us, and then we'll know.
He seems to be wanting to allow it, if you like, to have its own dynamic. It will take shape in good time.
Maybe positive thinking.
Well, he may have the difficulties of one more thing, which is the influence of Russians, and we'll hear more about that in your conversation with the General in a couple of minutes.